All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. What a great crowd. We are so excited to be welcoming to Left Bank Books the acclaimed best-selling author, Katherine Applegate. Notes before we begin. Tonight's event is only possible because of your support, so thank you so much for being here. When you shop at Left Bank Books, your money stays right in our local economy, so it helps to fund our parks and libraries and everything else that we love about St. Louis. So thank you so much for shopping local and for supporting us tonight and allowing us to support authors such as Katherine. If you're joining us from wherever you are on our virtual live stream, thank you so much for being here as well. You'll be able to participate in the Q&A at the end by leaving your question as a YouTube comment, so I'll keep an eye on that. So we appreciate having you here as well. All right, Katherine Applegate is a #1 New York Times bestselling author who has written many children's books, over 100 children's books, so many, including the one and only Ivan, which won a Newbery Medal, the one and only Bob, the one and only Family, Wish Tree, Doggo and Pupper series, and of course Animorphs and lots of others. Her newest book is Otter. Otter is the middle grade novel of Otter was a New York Times bestseller and spent 52 weeks on that list.
100. Oh no! Yeah, Otter the novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're up to 100.
Up to 100 now. And now, of course, we're celebrating the picture book version, which is perhaps even more adorable in the same story in a new format. So Otter spends her days playing underwater and learning life lessons from her mother. But when Otter's life takes a dramatic turn, she is rescued by humans. The people are kind and introduce Otter to other rescues, and soon it's clear that Otter has a talent for teaching other pups how to otter. Adapted by the best-selling novel of the same name and inspired by a true story, this new book is certain to enrapture young animal lovers. So here to tell us all about writing in her new book and, of course, otters, please give a wonderful warm welcome to Katherine.
And is this good to go?
Well,
Should I do anything?
fans and things that may have gone to sleep.
Oh, that'll happen. I have to tell you guys, I am just amazed that you're here because it's a school night. Because
Some of you should be there.
because it's raining, because apparently there was a tornado watch, and here you are. I just think it's miraculous when people show up at these events. You need me out of the way. It's just really means a lot because I'm a mom, but my kids are in their 20s now, but I just remember that chaos of the afternoon. And I know probably there's some teachers and librarians here, and it's just so cool that you come to these. It means the world to authors. So thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about authors and about writing. I know a whole lot more about writing than I do about otters. I will confess this fully. But then we can do some questions and answers. So if you think of a good question, just pop it in your brain, and we will do it at the end. And hopefully I'll have an answer. The very first question I took in my book for, I'm only like 3 days in, was how old do our otters before they die? And I had absolutely no idea. I still don't know. So if you have time to Google. So this is the cover. Now let's see if I can get this to advance. No, I can't. I have a certain ability to just, invite the tech friends. Okay, left or right, right? Oh, left. Right there, I did. And I've been doing this a while. So, kids. What is that? What do you think? Just yell. Otter. That isn't that. What's that? Otter. How about exactly? That's sweet. So many kids tell me that I have a huge misspelling on the cover of my book, and they're just all the copy editors are that bad. But Otter is named Otter because she is quite remarkable. She is the queen of play. And have you watched Otter's play? Anybody? By the way, there's some great online videos you can hit, including at the Monterey Bay Aquarium a sea otter webcam that's on almost 24 hours a day. And man, you wanna zen out, you wanna get soothed. Just watch some otters hanging out because they have not a care in the world. Have you been to your amazing aquarium, by the way? You are so lucky. Oh my gosh, I could not believe how gorgeous it was. I was just there this morning. Spent a lot of time with the interactive otter, and we were debating whether or not river otters were better than sea otters, and I'm pretty sure he won the argument. But it was fascinating. It's just, I think it's the best aquarium I've ever seen. It's just, you are so lucky. So the otter is actually based on sort of an amalgam of 2.5 otters, because I wanted to cover as much as I could for kids on what life in the wild and in captivity is like. But it is a real story. Very much in the vein of the one and only Ivan, which I wrote some time ago, which was also based on a real animal. There you see Ivan before and after. And researching that was heartbreaking, but it was also fascinating. And so I knew nothing about gorillas. So when I went to learn about otters, it was so much easier. There's so much online now to really fill your brain with ideas, and it was a lot easier to theoretically get into the head of an otter. This is the novel and the illustrator. Do any of the kids like to draw? Raise your hand. One of the best jobs in the world. Writing is the best job, but one of the best jobs in the world is being a children's book illustrator. And this guy's name is Charles Santoso. And when you look at the picture book, you're going to be so charmed. They just come to life, and they're so expressive. And he's done a bunch of my books. He's doing one that's coming out this fall called Pocket Bear. And he just has a way with animals. So you are going to love the illustrations. I didn't even need to write anything. The reason I write so much about animals is because I happen to love animals. When I was growing up, this is me with my current 2 dogs, I was sure I was going to be a vet. And I worked for a vet in high school, and mostly all I did was pick up poop and give cats baths. After was a stray in LA, and somebody had broken her neck. And they were going to put her to sleep. She was like 4 months old. And this wonderful rescue took her in. And we were allowed to adopt her as long as we could let her around any other dogs. And she was so bummed out. We conned the surgeon into letting us get a therapy dog in the form of Boss. And Boss is named after one of the dogs in The One and Only Bob, if you've read that book. So Boss is Bob's sister. And Boss is very bossy. But what I love about the picture book is the catalyst for writing it was a librarian. And I was at a school visit. This is a novel school visit in Northern California. And this librarian came to me and said, now for Ivan, there's this picture book version. For one school reads, wouldn't it be so cool if we had a picture book version of Otter? And I went to my editor and she said, yeah. And that I just love that the entire idea came from a teacher librarian, because of course teacher librarians are amazing. And it does work well. I've done a lot of ones. Have many of you here done like a one school, one book, where everybody reads the same book? I've had a lot of those for Goose Tree and for Ivan, and it works really well for Otter too, because you have, you can read from pre-K to as far up as you want to go, and you've got access to the same basic stories. So I'm so thrilled that you called. This is Monterey Bay. I used to live in LA, and Monterey is up the coast. It's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And that is where Otter lives. And at one point, a whole lot of otters there. And around by the turn of the century, we were down to because they were hunted. They were hunted for their incredibly dense fur. This is a modern day aquarium, which is very lovely. I'm not going to compare it to yours because yours is just as out of this world, but it's absolutely gorgeous too. And this is where Otter ended up living. Now, the thing about otters is they are facing all kinds of problems. Climate change being the cause. For one thing, waters are warming up. And interestingly enough, well, of course, it changes the kelp forest, and that's a very important ecosystem. And one of the things that's happening is great white sharks are zipping into shore, and they are experimenting with their hunting. A lot of times they're young and they're kind of learning how to hunt, and apparently they're not very good at it first. And so they'll look up and they'll see it. They love seals. Blubber, oh man, blubber is a delicacy. So they'll look up and they'll see a black, oblong shape floating, and they'll think, all right, dinner. And a lot of times it's a surfer or a surfboard, and all too often it's an otter. And the problem is otters have no blubber. They are nothing but fur. Densest fur on the planet. So of course they spit them right out. But the net result is you have a lot of injured adult otters. And that means you sometimes have orphaned baby otters. And this guy I love. This is he is notorious in the area. He's obsessed with surfboards. And he will climb on them, he will eat them. He likes kayaks and canoes too. But we don't want this with our wild animals, as charming as it is. And I admit it's funny. These guys are getting so comfortable around humans that it's really become a problem because we're encroaching on their habitat. So when they end up with these little babies, what they were doing was teaching them how to be otters. And humans have no idea how to be an otter. They were literally taking these babies out into the bay and swimming with them. And the babies would come back, and they go back each night, each day. They were trying to teach them how to hunt. It was not working because, of course, they bonded with the humans. It was very much like the one and only Ivan. Ivan, for a long time, essentially behaved like he was part human because he lived with humans for so long. So the parallels are kind of extraordinary, and they didn't know what to do. And then they thought, well, you know what? We have a couple resident otters, the most famous of whom was named Rosa. She died recently. And you're declared non-releasable when you've acclimated to humans, you're just like too used to them, or maybe you have an injury. And so usually an aquarium will have a few of those. And they thought, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's put this baby with this adult otter. We have no idea if she knows how to be a mom. So it was like a foster mother program, a surrogate mom program, and it worked brilliantly. Now, I think we decided this isn't going to work, but I'll click it just on the options. Yeah. So what you see here, this is a video. This is a little bitty baby, and to the left there is Rosa. And unfortunately, we can't do the video, but I will tell you what happens. This baby gets in there and is terrified and squeaks. An otter baby, scared baby otter squeaks like this. And goes in mad circles around and around and around. And Rosa, being an experienced mom, we've all been there, just calmly keeps chasing him around and finally grabs him. And by the end, he's sitting there on her tummy and totally docile. And that is why Rosa was such a great surrogate mother. One of the things they do when the babies are really tiny, even before they're with these surrogate moms, is they actually give them early swimming lessons. So they'll swirl them around in the water all day, which I think is really kind of a fun job. But my favorite job, and this is the best job after, well, parenting, of course, is the next job, I have to say. And being a children's book author or illustrator, they have a job for baby otter groomers. And when you brushed your hair this morning, it probably took, 20 seconds. It takes 3 hours to brush and groom a baby otter. And they have to do it constantly because after they're damp, they need to get air bubbles back into that dense fur, or they'll get cold. And it is the coolest job. And they sit around all day and just do that. And I am absolutely going to apply. So this, I love this. They call this their Darth Vader outfit. And it's a welder's helmet and a big poncho and a couple gloves. And the whole point of it is they have learned how quickly these babies will bond with humans, and we don't want that. So the attempt here is to not make eye contact, to not have much sensory input at all, hopefully no human scent, although that's hard, and to make the contact as limited as possible. So they still have to interact with them, but when they do it, they dress like Darth Vader. And it seems to work. This is one of the illustrations among many, and you can see how good Charles is at capturing that charming, just their faces are so expressive. This is a mom in the water, and sometimes if you're lucky, you'll see this in the bay. They tend to hang out these are southern sea otters. They're northern sea otters too. They're a little bit bigger. And they're different from river otters. River otters are kind of, they look more like wiener dogs. These guys are furry, very, very, very furry and big. And the mom has to do that all day. They are in the water almost 24 hours a day, and the ocean is a cold place. And the dads are useless. They're just gone. Mom does everything. And when she has to go hunt, what she does is she takes kelp. Kelp is this long green frond, that grows like seaweed. And she will tie up the baby. It's like a harness, like a car seat. Because these guys, when they're small, are so buoyant. They will float away like a beach ball. They do not sink. And so every time mom goes out, she has to tie up the kid. And some of us have thought about it. So it's fascinating to watch them in action. I love that. That's another Charles note that I think really captures the affection and the charm. So this is my an early photo, and you can see it was a very snazzy dresser. I was about 4. I lived in Michigan, and I've lived all over the country, but I was born in Michigan. And I had a really terrible secret, and I'm going to tell only the young people in the audience, and the adults are not supposed to hear this. You should cover your ears. When I was your age, I really, really, really hated to read. And so, if your mom and dad dragged you here against your will, trust me, I know how you're feeling. I thought it was boring. I did not see the point. I happen to have a daughter who has dyslexia. That can make it really challenging, but with good teachers, you can triumph over that. But now I just why would you read a book? And around 3rd grade, a teacher read Charlotte's Web to our class. And to me, that was my best friend book. It was about animals. And for the first time, I said, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this whole book thing. But maybe you don't like Charlotte's Web. That's okay. You're wrong, but it's okay. Maybe you don't like that is okay. But there is a book out there that's going to change your life. And maybe you haven't found it yet. I happen to love graphic novels like Dogman. Have you ever anybody read Dogman? I love Dogman. Or Captain Underpants. Maybe you like poetry, maybe you like nonfiction. You can fall in love with all kinds of books. That's why we have teachers and librarians and booksellers and parents. And you have to tell them what you want. If you want a book about a green giraffe, you have to ask for it. And good luck, Mom, because I don't think there are any. But somebody needs to write one. But just remember, if you had told me when I was your age that I was going to end up writing over 150 books, I would have said you were crazy. It just didn't seem possible because I didn't even like books. So some of you out here, I know you don't believe this, you're going to end up writing books, and you're going to find out it's the best job in the world, except for Otter Groomer. So this is my official author photo. Think about books. Yes, kids.
I beat up things up.
Why are they all mushed up?
For straw.
Exactly. But what you're implying here is that authors make mistakes. Is that what you're saying? Which would imply that grown-ups make mistakes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Because you know what we do? I probably made 100 mistakes this morning. And one thing I had to learn, and I hope you guys know this already, you're gonna make mistakes every time you try something new. I was so chicken to become a writer that I became what's called a ghostwriter. And I got a degree in English, good idea, and I became the world's worst waitress. And I spilled, this is true, 4 strawberry milkshakes on a man wearing an entirely white suit. Totally pink. And I was so humiliated. And I thought, okay, this is so embarrassing. I might as well just be a writer because I couldn't be anywhere. But I became a ghostwriter. I wrote Women of a Certain Age will remember Sweet Valley. I wrote 17 of those. Sweet Valley Twins. Do you remember who the evil twin was? Nobody? Jessica Doll. And I wrote Disney books like Aladdin and Little Mermaid. And man, writing for Disney, you better get your goofy voice right. Because they're very goofy. And then my husband and I started writing, and we wrote the series about animals that I imagine some of you of a certain age remember. And that was a book every single month. So it came very, very fast. And we had a new baby, so we drank a lot of coffee. But I started out so slowly because I was a chicken. So don't be like that because you're going to make mistakes. Just jump in there. This is part of writing. Writing is not really about writing. It's about rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. So know that as you're working on your stories. Kids always ask, number one question, where do you get your ideas? And for me, I find, and I don't know if this is true of most authors, I get mad. Not always. Sometimes I'm just passionate or fascinated by something. But if you can't think of anything to write about, ask yourself, what am I mad about? With Ivan, I was just appalled at the way this gorilla was being treated. And I found this article in the New York Times, and the headline was, Gorilla Pouts in Tacoma Mall, Tacoma is in Washington, while his future is debated. Imagine you're walking into, Walmart, and in the middle of it, there's a gorilla. This guy was there for 27 years, all by himself. And it was so horrifying that I wrote a book about it. Now, with Home of the Brave, it was a different thing. I was living in Minneapolis, and there were all these kids coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And I was just amazed at their bravery. These were refugees that had never seen snow. Minneapolis, I know you have snow here, but Minneapolis has snow. And they'd never eaten American food. They didn't speak English. They'd never gone to school, many of them. And I just thought that was incredible. So sometimes you're inspired to write a story because somebody else inspires you. I wrote Crenshaw, which is about a very large, possibly invisible cat. Because I love this little movie called Harvey. Do you, any of you ever see Harvey? Oh, I love that movie. So I wanted to write about an imaginary friend, but I also wanted to talk about childhood hunger and about homelessness. And it was a good vehicle for doing it so that younger readers could feel hopeful, I hope. Wish Tree, I hate the catalyst for this one, but I was really mad. This was a few years ago, and this family had moved in from another country. I think it was Kansas. And somebody had put, maybe it wasn't Kansas, and they were really thrilled to be there and so excited. And somebody put a big note on their door that said, "Go away," and it was horrifying. And really, in the end, inspired a lot of families to come forward and embrace them. Kids even got chalk, and they would write, "Stay here," and "We love you," and that kind of thing on their driveway. But it just made me so mad that I decided to write a story about a community dealing with that same kind of thing from the point of view of a tree, because why not? And I'll tell you why not, because trees don't move. So about halfway through that book, I went, I did the same thing with Ivan. I got halfway through it, and I literally threw it away. I thought, who on earth is going to want to read a book from POV, from the point of view of a gorilla? And I pulled it back out of the trash, and I said, I don't know. And then it went on to win a Newbery, and it became a bestseller, and it was a movie. And if I throw it away, who knows? So when you're writing your own stories and you're frustrated with them, hang on to them, because a lot of times in that big, coal mine, there's a little diamond. You just have to look for it. Willa Dean, I wrote because I was thinking a lot about climate change. And the same thing's true for otter. I was really concerned about them. They're not highly endangered, but they're endangered like so many species. And I wanted to talk about this amazing work that Aquarium was doing. That, by the way, is such a common otter thing, sea otter thing. They hold paws. It's so adorable. But the reason they hold their paws up in the air is because they're like solar panels and they absorb heat, which I think is so cool. And when you get a big bunch of them, I'll show you in a minute, you call it a raft. I think the superheroes in this story are Rosa is way up there, but also these marine biologists, who, by the way, like to be called aquarists, but I cannot say that. They study these guys, but they interact with them, and they spend precious years of their life just trying to increase the species by even a little bit. So they've gone from 50 in the Elkhorn Slough, Monterey Bay area to about 3,000, which is great. And a lot of it is because of this wonderful surrogate mom program. So that's a raft. Usually they're more closely connected. You can see hundreds of them sometimes, and they're all hanging on to each other, and that way they don't all float away. It's so cool. This is a moment when the page is open, and I was lucky enough to work a lot with the marine biologists on this because I wanted to make sure I got it right. It's very hard to write from the point of view of an animal you've never been. So I had a couple of the biologists vet the original novel, and that moment for them is always so bittersweet because they're letting them go and they've fallen in love with them no matter how hard they try not to, and yet they know how important it is to get them back out there. And look at the joy that results. One more thing, and then we can do some questions. This is Mrs. Gray. Remember I told you about Charlotte's Web? Mrs. Gray, that's the middle of, that is the middle of winter. And she was standing there without a coat on because Michigan people are tough. And she was the one who introduced me to Charlotte's Web. And I would never have become right without that moment. And so often, you teachers and librarians and parents don't get to see the results of your magic. So remember that. I'm sure she never knew that I went on to write 100 books. But if I hadn't had that moment, who knows? So remember what you're doing is really, really important, and it really, really matters. Now, does anyone have a question about otters, about writing? Hopefully writing. Yeah. Oh, I hate that question. Would you ask your parents who their favorite kid was? I know my answer. Something confident. I usually say that when I just finished because I'm so relieved that I actually managed to write a book. Because every time you go to write a book, you think you can't write a book, even if you've written a zillion books. But the ones I think that really matter to me are, especially the ones that were based on real life things. So Ivan was based on a real life event. Wish Tree was based on a real life event, and of course Otter. And I think maybe just because it allowed me to do even more research, and I love doing research, both because it's so fun, and also because I'm really good at procrastinating.
I'm gonna pass around a microphone to you so we can all hear.
What? Are you gonna make the one on the island about the nothing?
Should have been talking to my editor. Yeah. I'm actually working on it. And you know what? I love graphic novels. I'm not that visual person. And writing one so you can hand it off to an illustrator and let them do the really hard part has turned out to be really challenging because you have to change a lot of the story. But yeah, in fact, just today they sent me 3 possible illustrators. And it's so cool. That doesn't always happen. It's only because I'm old and I've been around a while. But they do, but it's really special when you get to actually have some input into into the art. I tend to kind of defer though. I stand back and go, do your thing, because it's when you get the first sketches on a book you've written, it's like, every holiday rolled into one, because it was just words in your head and somebody managed to take them and make them real. So yes, I can't believe you do that. Clearly you are a publishing insider.
Are cute for white animals?
Cool question. Well, remember I told you I was a ghostwriter, so I was writing some, maybe not so great books. And but we learned every time we write a not so great book. And my husband and I were walking along. We were actually in Florida, and we had a cat, and the cat was semi-feral. She lived with us, but she constantly wanted to go outside. So we had her on a leash because we had alligators in our backyard. And this was an apartment complex, and there was a little pond, and they were everywhere, and they loved to eat cats. So we're walking along, and it's like 10 at night, and we're walking our cat, and we're seeing an alligator, and I said, I would love to put kids in the heads of animals. And my husband, who loves sci-fi, said, that's got to be sci-fi. It's the only way you can do it. And that's how I got it. And we actually sold it, and this never happens, over the transom, just handed it off to the head of the last. Don't think that's normal, but it was partly because we've written so many, ghosted so many books. And it was really a trip. It was really fun. It started out very kind of gentle and formulaic. Oh yeah, it was gentle. Then we just went off. And my theory is that Scholastic was not reading it at that time. I come to these events, and there's always someone in the back, and they're always going, well, I guess I can give this away. Why did you kill Rachel? Don't. Oh. No, Rachel's fine.
How can you leave it on a cliffhanger?
That's well, it turned into a workout. It became, when we started, we were thinking war crimes, and there was so many of them, that you can only morph so many animals before you got it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Will you make a prequel to the one way either called
And what would you call it?
the one way Stella?
Oh, you're not the first person to ask me that. And I feel kind of bad that I didn't give Stella her own book. But I wrote this book called The One and Only Ruby. And we talk about Stella a lot. And the funny thing was, I realized they had very similar lives. They had, been in captivity, they'd been wild, they'd suffered, and they bonded. And somehow it felt like I would have been repeating the story almost. So I thought the way I could honor her was to write Ruby and kind of talk about the future a little more. But I love that you asked that question, because that means she spoke to me. I love stuff. And I don't know, I tried as hard as I could. I went to the Tacoma Public Library archives and hung out there for days, going through yellowing pieces of newspaper to find out everything I could. Like when Ivan got there, he was there with this was a pair of baby gorillas ordered like pizzas. It was that easy. This is mid-60s. The shop owner in Tacoma, Washington had a bunch of animals, thought, oh, it'd be way cool to have a gorilla, and literally ordered. And we think the entire family was probably wiped out. Spoiler alert. And no, that's it. And these two babies were thrown in this cage that got lost, and they were brought to Tacoma, and one of them was named Burma, and one was named Ivan. And the reason for that was because the store guy had a contest for kids, and the thing was, you had to name the gorillas after the last names of the store owners, which would be an I. And I found out as I was doing research that there had been an elephant there for a little while, but I know she got into the can of paint, got paint all over the place. Isn't there like a chicken or a rooster thing? I can't remember what it was. And it rides around on like a fire truck. That really happened. There's a seal in there that ate 100 pennies and died. That really happened. Look, it sounds like I write really grim books. I swear it's a good book. But anyway, yeah, that, so I hope that I did Stella justice, but I love that you cared about it.
Speaking of writing in animals, was there ever a time where you backed yourself into a corner with the story? And which, if there were multiples, which one was the worst to figure out?
Sometimes one of the things we do a lot is we think, oh, we're going to go in that direction, so we drop something in it, and then just leave it and walk away and hope nobody notices. But my favorite thing is somebody created a website called KASU, and it stood up for Katherine Applegate Screw Ups. And it's all the morphs we missed. And we have, they call it a series Bible. And basically it reminds you who lives where. And, when I did Sweet Valley, we knew exactly where Jessica's pink telephone was. And in Animorphs, we knew who morphed what, theoretically. But we kept screwing it up. And so people would be randomly morphing things they'd never touched. And in Animorphs, if you touch an animal, you can acquire their DNA and become that animal briefly. So that, I think, was the biggest mistake. I mean, plot-wise, the things like megamorphs and stuff like that allowed us to kind of go off or the chronicles, on tangents and kind of play a little bit more. But again, when you're editing, do you remember like Goosebumps? Any of you read Goosebumps now?
Absolutely.
I love, his name is Bob Stein. He's a great guy, and he was a comic before he became a scary guy. And those were out at the same time, and Babysitter's Club, which really was great. Anne Martin's amazing. Much better than Sweet Valley. And I can say that with authority. And those books all came out every single month. Don't you think, as a kid reader, wouldn't it be cool if a book you like came out every single month and you could go back and read it and read it? They don't do that anymore. And it's funny because I feel like the logistical challenges are actually less now because we have, online possibilities. But nobody does that. So we were doing, at the same time all those other people we were doing a book every month.
We'll do a couple more back here, and then I'll head back to
What if you write Otter in poetry?
What a cool writing question. You sound like a writer. That's a really good question because I could have written it a different way. I could have just written it in prose, but there are 2 books I've done in free verse. I love free verse. Because it allows you to play with language. And you may have noticed my books have a lot of white space on them, If you look at Ivan, it's the first chapter is, I think, 16 words. That's because I'm a slow reader or a lazy writer, I'm not sure. But also because I think it allows you to focus on lyricism. And to me, when you look at otters in the water, it's poetry. There's no other way to be inside the head of an animal like that. When I wrote Home of the Brave in free verse, it's about a kid who's acquiring language. And for an ESL kid who's looking at the that just wasn't my thing. So the very first books I started writing were those Disney books, actually. And that's how I started to learn how to be a writer. That's a good question.
Got time for a couple more. Any other questions?
I had a question about the growing darkness and wars. It's just after the war, how much about what David did became public knowledge?
Oh gosh, no, I'm not going to answer that.
Dirty little secret. I'll let anyone find out.
I feel once I read the book, or collected the book, it belongs to you. And I tell kids this all the time when they'll say, well, what happened to blah, blah? Because it does. It's your story. And I know what I think, but I'm not. Is that a bad answer? It's an honest answer. I really do feel like stories kind of take on their own momentum.
Out of everything that you've written so far, what has been the most challenging? Not necessarily the hardest, but most challenging.
Oh, you sound like a writer too. Ivan was a real challenge because, where I threw it out, that tells you I was having issues. I decided to write that very novelistically. And I was going to I did all my research, and I was going to follow it it was almost going to be like journalistic. And I was going to follow the facts wherever they led me. But the problem is, sometimes the real world doesn't accommodate a good story. And so I got halfway through, and that's when I realized I had to fictionalize it. And that was a kind of relief because you're anthropomorphizing. You are jumping into the head of in this case, a real creature. And it felt almost invasive. And I didn't know. I knew nothing about turtles. So I had to go back from scratch and start thinking that way. And I love doing it, but I'm always very, very aware. Otter is the closest, is where I've tried most to stay factual without, bridging the gap too much. And that's why I had it vetted by Monterey Bay Aquarium aquarists, because I wanted to be sure I had my facts right. Ivan obviously was a kind of a dive into the unknown. I never got to meet Ivan. He died right after the book came out. But a friend of mine, John Shue, do any of you know Mr. Shue, the librarian? He was able to go meet Ivan right before he died. And John had my novel, and Ivan signed it with his finger paint. He loved to finger paint. And so, Ivan, not John. And so he really treasures that. But I did get to know Ivan's zookeeper, whose name is Jody Kerrigan, and she's a primatologist who goes to Rwanda often and takes people on tours and just, lives gorillas. So those kind of opportunities that came out of taking that risk have just been, remarkable. So again, if you are writers, and I know some of you are, don't be scared. Just jump into it and it's hard. It really is. And you're going to get rejected and you're going to, have bad days. But it's so meaningful and so joyful when you get to do it. I always tell people, if you think you want to be a writer, take a year and tell yourself you cannot put a word on a page. And if you go nuts, then that tells you you're meant to be a writer. Because writers just can't not. So I would love for you all to give yourselves a major round of applause because you've done amazing.
If you have any further questions, we'll have time to chat and sign lines. So run up to the front real quick. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We're going to get book signed. So if you haven't bought your book yet, we've got them for sale at the front. We have Otter, of course, and then a bunch of previous ones as well, so you can grab those. What we're going to do is our signing table is going to be over in the next room. If you know our psychology section, that's where it's going to be. You've got hopefully a little ticket with your group number so that people don't have to stay standing the whole time. So in about 5 minutes, so we can let Katherine get settled, we'll start with group number 1, and then everybody else will, I'll call you up from there. Some of your books are already signed because we had that event this morning with Katherine. If you would still like to be in the signing line to either get it personalized or just to say hi, you're of course welcome to stay for that. Otherwise, let me know if you have any questions, and thank you so much for joining us today.
How do we get